Hey guys, picture this. You're a noble lord or a humble servant, and with a single step, you're faced with a mystery that's somehow both gross and fascinating. How did people actually go to the bathroom in medieval castles? No flushing toilets, no running water, just a lot of ingenuity, and perhaps a dash of bravado to keep things from becoming a total biohazard. Before we get into the grisly details, hit that like button if you've ever wondered what medieval plumbing actually looked like. Because spoiler, it's not what you'd expect. Dim the lights, get comfortable, but maybe keep a handkerchief nearby, and let's unravel the stinky secrets behind castle bathrooms. Yes, that asterisk is an adventure you never knew you needed. In the quiet dawn of castle mornings, the young Squire Aldrich wandered through the near-empty courtyard, his footsteps soft against the cold stone. He had heard whispers of a hidden place beneath the great hall, a secret where waste was disposed of something that seemed both practical and faintly mysterious. As he peered around, dimly lit by the early light filtering through narrow windows, he noticed a slightly ajar door with rough-hewn wood, and a faint, musty smell emanating from below. Curiosity tugged at him, but he hesitated, feeling the weight of unspoken customs that kept such matters invisible, yet ever present in castle life. The castle's routines, quiet and unremarkable to outsiders, quietly thrived on these hidden corners, where the mundane became part of the castle's silent rhythm. Later that day, Castle Steward Master Havel leaned against a timber beam, eyes partly shadowed by the flickering torchlight as Aldrich approached. With a calm, measured voice, the steward explained the ancient customs of waste disposal, describing how the hidden latrines had been a necessity for centuries. Simple pits, or small rooms built beneath the hall, kept out of sight, but crucial to the castle's daily functioning. Havel's descriptions carried a faint sense of routine, a tone that suggested these were matters not to be overly analyzed, but accepted as part of castle life. Yet, beneath his words, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of concern about foul odors and the looming threat they posed to the noble family's reputation. The steward, like the castle itself, managed this ancient system with a patient, dependable calm. As Aldrich listened, an irony unfolded quietly. How something so necessary, so mundane, remained shrouded in silence and secrecy, its very existence a subtle human compromise. In the shaded corners of the castle, waste and water mingled in the shadows, unnoticed by most, but essential to the daily comfort of its residents. The steward chuckled softly at the thought, perhaps amused by humankind's ability to turn such mundane functions into rituals of discretion and modesty. The castle's hidden latrines, while practical, also underscored the human tendency to hide inconvenient truths behind walls and cloaks of civility. A small irony wrapped in centuries of castle life. No prophet's face, no divine pronouncement, just the quiet acknowledgement that decay and sanitation are human responsibilities best kept out of sight. By midday, the castle's atmosphere settled into a calm, gentle routine. The matter of waste discreetly managed beneath old wooden beams and stone floors. Aldrich's curiosity faded into a quiet acceptance as the busy sounds of servants tending to their chores echoed faintly in the background. The secret of the hidden latrine was just another thread in the fabric of castle life, the mundane, necessary, and oddly reassuring in its consistency. The foul odors, once a looming threat, now seemed distant, as if the castle's simple, unassuming systems had tamed even the most human of nuisances. The day slowly shifted toward a more peaceful pace, each small task flowing into the next in a gentle, unremarkable rhythm, like a lullaby for the aging walls of stone. Reflecting in the quiet hours, Aldrich mused softly on how every corner of the castle, even the hidden, unnoticed ones, carried stories of human persistence and imperfection. These small struggles dealing with waste, maintaining order, hiding the less elegant truths, were universal and timeless. Perhaps, he thought, even prophets or kings could learn something from the modest routines of sanitation, how discretion and routine quietly preserve dignity and peace, despite the human tendency towards chaos. The castle, aging and full of secrets, stood silent, bearing witness to generations who mastered the art of keeping the unpleasant at bay. In the stillness, it was clear. Human progress often whispered softly in the background of everyday life, which, in its quiet way, endured. In the quiet hours of the castle, the grand hall remained a place of lively feasts and stories. But even amid the clatter of plates and soft chatter, the need for privacy persisted in unseen corners. Servants and nobles alike moved through their routines, some seeking the faint comfort of a private garderobe, while others simply endured the cramped and often smelly communal facilities. It was a slow, ongoing dance of patience and necessity, as stone walls and wooden doors offered little respite from the day-to-day human needs that persisted regardless of status. The distant echo of footsteps and the faint rustling of garments provided a soundtrack to this unremarkable, yet quietly vital aspect of castle life. Somewhere in the shadows, faces blurred and unremarkable in their anonymity continued to embody the simple, enduring truth of human existence. Everyone, eventually, must attend to their own small, daily rituals. As the banquet season approached, tensions simmered beneath the thick stone ceilings, particularly over the limited and uneven access to privy spaces. The grand Lady Isolde, with her delicate sensibilities and finely embroidered gown, demanded her own private garderobe, insisting on a measure of dignity reserved for her rank. Meanwhile, the castle's kitchen staff, mostly collapsed into the shadows by the kitchens or down narrow stone corridors, were forced into the most cramped and less hygienic garderobes, which reeked of smoke, mold, and years of neglect. Class divisions, long woven into the fabric of castle life, now found expression in these small, often overlooked chambers, where discomfort and unfairness nested together with quiet, unspoken resentment. The imbalance was obvious, yet little could be done in the immediate horizon to alter this daily truth, which everyone simply accepted with a resigned shrug. Amid this, the sense of slow, almost humorous irony grew. The grand lady's demands contrasted starkly with the reality faced by men and women who cleaned and maintained the castle's less glamorous corners. Irony settled like a gentle layer of dust over the castle's quiet corridors, as the noble lady's demands for privacy slowly contrasted with the humble, drafty garderobes that the kitchen staff endured. It was a strange kind of quiet reproach that flickered through the hallways, an unspoken acknowledgement of the delicate distance between rank and necessity. Servants, with their faces half buried in coarse cloths, sometimes exchanged tired glances or soft smirks when passing the grand lady's chamber. Her requests for a secret sanctuary for her toilette highlighted the growing gap between aristocratic comfort and the humble functions of castle life. Yet, amid the small ironies, life persisted with mundane patience, like a gentle tide that replenished the quiet boredom of castle routines. The absurdity of human effort, creating comfort and fairness in small corners, and overlooking the bigger picture of shared needs, felt somehow timeless and crowd-pleasing in its quiet humor. Over time, a sense of calm settled like soft dusk across the stone walls, as castle life shifted into a quieter rhythm of acceptance. Nobles and servants alike began to recognize that these tiny struggles over privacy and hygiene were woven into the human fabric, never entirely solvable, but quietly endured. The once sharp distinctions softened slightly as gestures of mutual patience emerged. A servant politely waiting outside the lady's chamber, or a noble quietly relieving herself in a corner of the shared garderobe, neither demanding nor despairing. The air grew cooler, the sounds muted, and the small routines felt less like disputes and more like the slow, gentle dance of everyday existence. In that calm, there was a gentle acknowledgement that life's small irritations and inequalities, while persistent, were also fleeting. It was perhaps the slowest, most human version of progress. Simply accepting that some needs remain inconvenient, yet undeniably essential, reflecting on these humble, often overlooked moments, one begins to see how human resilience quietly shapes the grander story of castle life. How people, regardless of status, find slow comfort or simple humor in their daily routines. The castle's hidden corners, like the garderobes, serve as silent witnesses to human imperfection and endurance. There is a gentle dignity in their neglect, and in the small compromises that everyone made, whether noble or servant, faces blurred in the half-light, hands clenched around coarse cloths, eyes gazing into the distance, all tell a story of ordinary life being quietly real and imperfect, yet somehow sufficient. Perhaps this slow acceptance, neither bitter nor overly romantic, is the true secret behind centuries of silence on these matters. In this calm, human stories continue in the background, like faint echoes of the past, still quietly, undeniably there. On a quiet, moonless night within the stone walls of the castle, the watchmen, clad in simple tunics and thick cloaks, moved slowly through the dim corridors, their footsteps muffled by worn wooden floors. As the wind whispered outside, they paused near a faintly outlined wall, noticing a slight unevenness, an almost imperceptible crack beneath the ancient stones that seemed unusual for such a sturdy structure. Curious and cautious, Aldrich and Master Havel exchanged glances, understanding that perhaps secrets long hidden were now beginning to surface. Even in the stillness of the night, their shadows flickered on the rough surface as they tilted their lanterns, searching for the source of the suspicious opening. It was a moment of quiet anticipation, as old stones and forgotten hinges held their silent, dusty secrets just out of sight. Slowly, with a gentle push and a careful pry, the two men revealed a narrow passageway behind the wall, leading down into darkness. The air grew colder and heavier as they ventured into the hidden space, where a faint smell of dampness and decay wafted up, making them pause. What they discovered was a flooded underground chamber, its waters murky and disturbed, sluggishly swirling from the rising tide of waste and refuse gathered over untold years, an unintended consequence of the castle's aging drainage system. The flickering lantern cast trembling shadows over the filth and the water's oily surface, revealing the unsettling truth that their castle's drainage had turned into a stagnant, disease-ridden pool. Tension settled over the two men as they stared, knowing they faced not just a sanitation problem, but a threat to everyone living above this submerged ruin. Aldrich, with a resigned sigh, voiced the irony that even the most carefully guarded, noble castle could cradle such a squalid secret beneath its polished stones, an ironic twist of human effort and neglect. Master Havel chuckled softly, a dry smile catching on his face, noting that they had uncovered a chamber that looked more like a neglected pond than a part of their home. They exchanged views with a kind of weary humor about the absurdity of their predicament. After all, who would have suspected the castle's hidden utility to be so profoundly disgusting? The realization sparkled quietly in their eyes. Their task now was to confront this subterranean mess with practicality, not panic, at least for now. The absurdity of their discovery seemed almost pedestrian, yet beneath it lay a silent reminder of human imperfection. In the calm light of dawn, the castle's courtyard regained its usual quiet rhythm, with hens sunbathing on stone walls and servants quietly chopping wood or sweeping the flagstones. Aldrich and Havel returned to their work, both secretly planning the next steps, an effort to redirect the runoff that had soiled their underground sanctuary. They devised a straightforward, pragmatic solution to reroute the castle's water flow away from the flooded chamber, installing a new drainage trench along the outer foundations, with a gentle slope leading to a nearby stream. The process was methodical, with shovels and wooden planks moving slowly, almost like a ritual of restoring order from chaos. Their slow, deliberate actions embodied human patience, an acknowledgement that even the gravest problems could be managed through quiet persistence. As the days went on, the castle settled back into its habitual calm, the hidden chambers now quietly rerouted and drained, their dark secrets less threatening and more just distant memories. Aldrich and Havel often exchanged small, knowing smiles about the absurdity of their nighttime adventure. How a simple, overlooked wall had revealed a world of stagnation and danger. They understood that castles, like all human endeavors, were imperfect collections of stone and wood, riddled with forgotten flaws and hidden truths. Yet, through their calm, steady work, they had turned a moment of potential disaster into an example of quiet human ingenuity. And so, beneath the peaceful fortress, life continued slowly, softly, an unremarkable, persistent testimony to human imperfection and the ongoing necessity of care. In the calm dawn of a medieval morning, the defenders of Castle Ravenshield gathered in a stone hall, unaware that the day's quiet would soon be disrupted. As they moved sluggishly, stoking fires, sharing simple breads, the castle's aging drainage system stood silently, a modest network of wooden pipes and clay channels tucked beneath the thick stone floors. Everything was ordinary, even dull, in the slow rhythm of daily life. The castle's latrine, a small wooden box over a pit, felt distant and unremarkable, yet essential in its quiet persistence. Shadows flickered gently on the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of wet wood and warm bread as the morning passed with unhurried ease. No one suspected that the coming hours would turn their routine into an unintended comedy of errors, cloaked by the slow, steady passing of time. Later that afternoon, distant drums announced the approach of invaders, their footsteps echoing in the mind's ear, gradually pulling the castle into tense alertness. Soldiers sharpened swords, guards inspected the walls, and villagers hurried to reinforce the gates, all amid a brewing storm. Outside, dark clouds gathered low, heavy with rain, giving a somber tone to the sky. Inside, the castle's wooden pipes groaned under increased pressure, their joints softened by age and neglect, as the siege laid its silent siege upon their routine. Somewhere near the great hall, the humble latrine awaited its usual duty, now vulnerable to the forces of nature and siege alike, whispering quiet warnings of impending calamity. The castle's heartbeat slowed into a cautious, collective pause. Undisturbed, yet unexpectedly fragile beneath the weight of conflict, night fell with a restless, muted roar, and the rain began to fall in relentless sheets, pounding the sturdy walls with a fatigue born of centuries. The drainage system, strained from repeated storms, faltered as water struggled to find its way away from the castle. Meanwhile, the defenders, amidst shifts and whispered strategies, remained unaware of the silent chaos brewing beneath them. Somewhere, the humble wooden latrine groaned under the rising pressure, crackling faintly as the ancient seals weakened. Then, with a sudden, quiet rupture more subtle than a splash, but just as unmistakable, the main latrine's outlet gave way. A thick, foul tide seeped into the great hall, creeping like a sluggish, unwelcome guest across stone floors, transforming the castle's dignity into a soggy, odorous mess. Chaos stirred among the soldiers, who paused, uncertain whether the threat was from enemy swords or the seepage now threatening to drown their pride. Calm after the storm, though it was hardly more than a lull, settled briefly over the castle's battered interior. The defenders, now faced with a flood of muddy, stinking water, moved with a kind of weary inefficiency, all too aware of the absurdity that had unfolded. Amidst the clatter of buckets and the slow trudging of guards to contain the mess, there was a shared, unspoken acknowledgement of human imperfection. The flood pooled around the benches, and the edges of what was once a simple necessity, transforming the castle's shared space into an accidental pond. The rain continued softly outside, an indifferent backdrop to this slow sinking into the mundane tragedy of aging infrastructure. In this quiet moment, the castle's quiet resilience revealed itself not through victory or defeat, but through the calm acceptance of the inevitable, even when it involved a flooded latrine. As dawn approached, the castle's defenders, exhausted and smelling of rain and mud, began the slow process of repair and reflection. The flooded hall was now a memory, an odd, undignified chapter in their otherwise steadfast lives, something to be quietly forgotten, or perhaps mildly amused by. The storm outside had passed, leaving a softened sky and a faint scent of dampness in the stone corridors. Behind the flickering lanterns, blurred faces and unseen eyes seemed to acknowledge the patience required for human imperfections. Those tiny, constant failures woven into the fabric of daily life. The castle's old drainage, patched and reinforced, stood quietly in the background, an unsung reminder that even the most sturdy defenses can falter in quiet, unobserved ways. And so, life in the castle moved forward, a little damp, a little wiser, but still fundamentally human in its slow, gentle endurance. In the quiet, shadowed corners of a medieval castle, the journey to relieve oneself was a routine woven into the fabric of daily life, often overlooked save for its humble necessity. The stone floors echoed softly under the weight of countless footsteps, and the distant murmur of conversations mingled with the faint drip of water from chamber taps. When the siege finally lifted and the waters of resourcefulness began to recede, the castle's lord, somewhat weary but pragmatic, commissioned a new stone garderobe system, an innovation that whispered promises of cleanliness and comfort amid the stone cold walls. Aldrich, the seasoned steward, observed these changes with a quiet sense of achievement, carefully recording every detail for future reference. It was, after all, a small but vital victory in maintaining the fortress's resilience, an ordinary act of stewardship shaping history, quietly and persistently. As days turned into weeks, the castle's inhabitants adapted to the new garderobe. But beneath the surface of this calm acceptance existed a subtle tension. The distance to the privy, the cold touch of stone, and the faint scent of earth mixed with lingering ash from the fires created a sensory reminder of their collective survival. Aldrich, now more familiar with the routine and its flaws, noticed the small, inevitable inconveniences: clogged drains, streaks of moss creeping into corners, the slow decline of once pristine walls. The castle's defenses had grown stronger, yet the basic human act of seeking relief remained an imperfect, sometimes humorous challenge. It was an irony that such a mundane necessity persisted as both a symbol of civilization and its stubborn human imperfection. Irony settled quietly into the castle stories, as if the very walls had learned to smirk at their own resilience. The elaborate stone system, designed for efficiency, often faltered at the worst moments, emitting faint gurgles or leaks that no amount of patching could fully silence. Aldrich documented these minor failures with a dry wit, noting that even in grandeur, human effort remained imperfect. The servants and guards chuckled softly at the recurring mishaps, mild humor in their daily routines, while always mindful of the essential truth. Survival depended on such simple, unglamorous details. Light shone through narrow slits, casting shadows that danced silently across the worn stone, reminding everyone that life was a delicate balance of order and chaos, even in the castle's most private spaces. Over time, the castle's privies became quieter, less a place of chaos, and more a part of their steady, rhythmical days. Aldrich, now familiar with its winding pipes and sturdy stones, reflected on these small acts of maintenance as a kind of silent meditation, an unglamorous but necessary part of life behind thick castle walls. The distant sounds of forging and work carried on, unchanging now, in harmony with the slow, measured drip of water and the faint hush of footsteps. Once viewed as merely functional, the garderobe system had become a symbol, humble, unassuming, yet essential, anchoring the castle's ongoing story of resilience. In these moments of quiet daily routine, life's simple truths reasserted themselves with peaceful dignity. Aldrich's records, now filled with sketches, notes, and reflections, served as a silent testament to the unremarkable yet profound importance of basic human needs within grand structures. These lessons, written in careful script, echoed a quiet understanding that true strength in a fortress or in human life resided as much in the mundane as in the magnificent. The castle endured not just through its stone walls, but through the patience and persistence woven into its daily maintenance. As he closed his scribbled ledger, Aldrich felt a gentle certainty that these humble acts, so easily overlooked, had helped shape the survival of the old fortress. And somewhere in the blurred faces of prophets and forgotten kings, there hovered an unspoken acknowledgement. It is often the simplest, most human routines that quietly, tirelessly preserve the larger story. In the early days of castle life, beneath the looming stone walls and reassuring battlements, the garderobe was born, a modest protrusion from the wall, often just a small wooden box or a simple room that jutted out over the moat. These crude structures, silent and unmoving, became quiet fixtures of daily routine, their presence noticed only by the faint drip of water or the hurried glance of a servant. It was a humble beginning, where sanitation had no grand design, only necessity. The castle's residents, unaware of the future chaos of hygiene, simply accepted this as a fact of medieval life. Somewhere in the shadows, the first faint idea of communal cleansing took root, a slow human effort to manage the mundane but ever-present problem of waste. As centuries trickled by and castles grew more complex, the garderobes became slightly more sophisticated, small rooms with seats, sometimes lined with iron or stone, hanging precariously over the water below. Now the lords and their retainers faced the daily ritual of seats shifting beneath them, the faint splash below muffled by the stillness of stone corridors. Yet tensions arose as the innovations remained minimal. The waste still fell freely into the moat, creating a subtle, unavoidable reminder of human imperfection. Occasionally, the scent drifted through open windows, prompting quiet, unnoticed complaints among the more sensitive inhabitants. Somewhere in that steady, unremarkable evolution, a strange irony was quietly emerging, designed spaces for disposal, yet increasingly bound to their crumbling connection with cleanliness. By the late medieval period, the garderobe had become almost a fixture, more or less, a small chamber projecting outward, with a seat facing outward or into a chamber pot kept nearby. The irony was undeniable. The very rooms meant to contain waste were often the least sanitary parts of the castle. Their wooden floors and stone walls harboring a silent, unspoken chaos. Servants would quietly tend to the continuous flow of waste, often with little understanding of sanitation beyond the mechanics of emptying. The castle's grand walls, shining in the dawn light, concealed a network of small, private failures, imperfect, human, slightly humorous in their universal ordinariness. Still, for all their flaws, these garderobes persisted, quietly shaping the habits and humor of those who used them. Looking back over the centuries, the garderobe's evolution, though slow and unremarkable on the surface, reveals a steady human patience and tolerance for the mundane. Wooden seats and stone chambers persisted, unchanged in essence, as occupants sat in contemplative silence that grew more resigned than distressed. Their faces, often blurred or hidden behind shadowed hoods or curtains, bore quiet expressions of mild boredom or amused acceptance. The smell of damp wood and faint decay became part of the castle's unspoken atmosphere, a reminder of the simple, imperfect life within thick stone walls. From these quiet beginnings, thoughts slowly drifted toward the concept of hygiene. Yet the castle, like its inhabitants, remained rooted in tradition, embracing the mundane with a gentle, patient humor. In the end, the story of the garderobe is a story of quiet perseverance, a testament to human resilience in the face of daily necessity. the humble protrusion, so often unnoticed and simply accepted, quietly laid the groundwork for future innovations, shaping a slow but inevitable journey toward cleanliness and sanitation. As the castle walls stood firm and the waste kept its silent course into the moat, there was a peace in knowing that beneath the grandeur, life was composed of small routines, forgotten moments, and muted humor. The faces thus hidden behind shadowed curtains or blurred by time remind us that even the most mundane human endeavors are woven into the fabric of history, ordinary, imperfect, and quietly enduring. As castles rose higher, reaching toward the often gray and brooding sky, the need for discreet sanitation grew increasingly apparent. Early garderobes, a simple stone shaft leading from a chamber, offered a modest convenience, with the wind sometimes whispering through the narrow openings, carrying faint hints of their contents below. The stone walls, cold and unyielding, concealed the odorous realities of daily life. Yet no matter how solidly built, the foul smells persisted, drifting through cracks as a quiet, unwelcome reminder. Nobles, seated in delicate contemplation or involved in courtly pursuits, occasionally looked wistfully toward the outside, as if longing for fresh air and cleaner spaces. In this slow, unspoken tension, the human desire for hygiene clashed silently with the stubborn imperfections of medieval engineering. As the centuries continued, architects refined their ideas, installing ventilation shafts and rudimentary sewage channels that aimed to carry away the steadily mounting waste. The chambers became slightly more sophisticated, arched stone corridors with small openings to let in a touch of air, almost as if the builders recognized the necessity of some relief from the persistent stench. Yet, despite these efforts, the foul odors stubbornly lingered, curling around the stone walls and settling into the distant corners, indifferent to the ambitions of their creators. Nobles seated in their grand halls or on their balconies might have noticed these whispers, although their attention was often elsewhere, perhaps on distant prospects, court politics, or simply the day's quiet routines. The smell of unbroken human convenience persisted, a reminder that nature's quiet rebellion was hard to tame. Irony softened the air as, over time, more elaborate solutions emerged. Chamber pots replaced or complemented the older garderobes, offering a seemingly cleaner alternative. These portable containers, often made of clay or metal, were carried with a certain mundane dignity from chamber to chamber, only to be emptied, sometimes reluctantly, into distant cesspits. Nobles chuckled softly at the thought of their finely dressed servants balancing these containers, as if humanity's ongoing quest for cleanliness was merely a theatrical act. The stone walls of the castles kept silent, their surfaces mottled with age, as if amused by the persistent human folly. Behind the brightly painted tapestries and carved wood, life carried on with small mundane gestures, waiting, passing, and occasionally sighing at the unchanging cycle. The absurdity of it all seemed almost comforting in its quiet repetition. Gradually, a sense of calm settled over the castle's inner chambers as they adapted to these new routines, the need for hygiene becoming less of an urgent battle and more of an accepted facet of daily existence. The chambers and corridors, though still tinged with the faint, lingering smell, grew accustomed to it, blending into the background like an old, familiar tune. The servants, nobles, and visitors alike moved through these spaces with a kind of quiet resignation, their faces mostly blurred by light and shadow, lost to some timeless patience. The stone walls, weathered by centuries, seemed to watch over these slow adaptations, neither condemning nor celebrating, simply witnessing the quiet persistence of human imperfection. Perhaps in this calm there was a modest dignity, an acknowledgement that some struggles are simply woven into the fabric of everyday life and unlikely to be fully resolved. Looking back, it is clear that the evolution of medieval latrines was never a grand story of triumph, but rather a slow, continuous dialogue with our own limits. Castles, with their stone walls and whispering winds, quietly bore witness to this ongoing human effort, an array of modest innovations layered upon centuries of practice. The faint traces of odors and the faintly humorous image of nobles balancing chamber pots echo the softer, more humorous side of human history. These little routines, so ordinary yet so persistent, remind us that in the end, our quest for cleanliness is just another chapter in the long, sleepy story of our imperfect humanity, silently written into the stones of old fortresses and the quiet corners of our lives. In the quiet corners of castles during the 13th century, the first signs of privacy in waste management appeared. Small, discreet chambers appeared behind heavy drapes, where wooden seats were set over shallow cesspits, an attempt, perhaps, at dignity amid the utilitarian chaos of castle life. These privy chambers offered a fleeting sense of seclusion, a subtle shift from the communal discomfort of earlier days. Yet, beneath their modest veneer, a new challenge arose: how to contain the ever-increasing amount of waste without offending the noses of those nearby. It was a quiet, human acknowledgement that even the most basic needs deserved a touch of refinement, however faint. And so, quietly, history's first private corners for human waste came into being, dreaming of cleanliness in a world still learning to manage its own refuse. As the privy chambers found their place within castle walls, a certain tension grew. Waste was no longer just discarded into open courtyards, but confined within stone and wood, demanding attention and disposal. Over time, the wooden seats over cesspits became more elaborate, and the smell of damp earth mixed with growing worries about health and hygiene. Castle stewards occasionally wrestled with foul odors and overflowing pits, their days punctuated by silent rituals of cleaning, tiny acts of order amidst the chaos. Ironies lingered in the air. These chambers promised privacy, yet they depended on the fragile, often neglected systems of waste disposal that risked undermining their very purpose. The quiet discomfort of managing waste within stone walls became a moral, if unspoken, obligation. Here, in the shadowed corners, human imperfection met the limits of medieval ingenuity. The irony of the situation became clearer. For all the private comfort these chambers aimed to provide, they also introduced an unintended comedy: clumsy fetchings of water, spills on uneven floors, and the faint, persistent sound of things slowly slipping away. Over time, some chambers featured simple techniques: brushes, buckets, and small accompanying windows for ventilation. Each addition carefully chosen not to disturb the peaceful silence that cloaked the castle in the evenings. The faces of caretakers, often blurred by the dim lighting, reflected a kind of resigned patience, as if they understood that their work was both necessary and endlessly repetitive. Perhaps, in these ordinary tasks, there was a quiet humor, man's pursuit of hygiene, so earnest, yet so limited by the mundane. In this slow unfolding, the castle's hidden world of waste quietly revealed itself as a small theater of human effort and stubborn imperfection. By the later medieval period, these chambers had settled into a calmer rhythm, their presence a familiar, if unglamorous, part of castle life. Walls grew darker with age, the air thick with an unspoken understanding that human needs are universal and eternal. The castle staff, wearing simple linens and heavy boots, moved in slow, practiced routines, their motions unhurried beneath the flickering light of torches. The quiet sophistication of their work lay in its ordinariness. Waste was now a constant, unremarkable element of daily survival. In the stillness that followed each cleaning, there was a kind of peaceful acceptance. Humans, after all, are bound to their routines, quietly acknowledging that even the most private acts are part of a larger, timeless process. Somewhere within this calm, a gentle humor persisted, the gentle reminder that no matter how grand the walls, some aspects of life remain humbly mundane. Looking back, the evolution of castle latrines from crude garderobes to private chambers hints at a slow but steady human patience with imperfection. Behind the tapestries and stone, these quiet spaces reveal a universal truth that in managing our waste, we also manage our dignity imperfectly, yet with care. Today's modern notions of sanitation are far removed from these humble beginnings. Yet the echoes of those early chambers remain in the understanding that comfort and privacy have always carried an element of quiet irony and compromise. In the end, these chambers symbolize not just human ingenuity, but also our gentle acceptance of the ordinary, the flawed, and the faintly humorous parts of everyday life. Perhaps in their stillness, they whisper that progress is slow, perhaps too slow for some, but quietly continuous nonetheless. In the quiet corners of medieval chambers, the idea of sitting upon a fixed garderobe was as natural as the turning of the seasons, an unspoken routine carried by tradition, and the gentle creak of wooden turrets. As centuries passed, patience grew thin among those who found the relentless shaft rooms inconvenient, especially in colder months when the stone walls seemed to close in a little tighter. The introduction of portable chamber pots emerged quietly, made of pewter, gleaming softly under candlelight, promising a new kind of personal liberty. For some courtiers, it was a small revolution, an act of defiance against the ancient scaffolding of medieval hygiene. Yet, amid the murmurs and cautious glances, many kept their loyalty to the old ways, the silent guardians of tradition, unchanged by the promise of convenience. A tension simmered beneath the surface as the chamber pot, with its sleek ceramic form, began more visible presence in the royal chambers. Courtiers debated in hushed voices whether a porcelain vessel could truly replace the tradition-bound shaft, or if convenience threatened the very fabric of their ancient customs. Some argued that hygiene was a personal matter, best handled in private, while others worried that moving away from fixed fixtures might erode centuries of decorum. The soft clink of pewter and the delicate thud of ceramic pots became small tokens of a quiet cultural upheaval, as everyone wondered if change was inevitable or simply an uncomfortable passing phase. The blurred faces of their prophets, unseen, shadowed, seemed to watch silently as the debate drifted through the stone halls. Irony crept in as some soldiers and servants began to joke about the newfound freedom, their chuckles muffled by the hushed corridors, as if defying an unspoken ban on their amusement. The chamber pots, once regarded as a delicate innovation, now became symbols of petty rebellion, an everyday absurdity dressed up in porcelain and pewter. Chairs scraped softly as courtiers shifted, balancing the delicate line between tradition and progress, with cautious smiles and half-hearted banter. Even the most devout guardians of custom could not help but notice how the portable vessels had made their way into whispered conversations and timid experiments, an awkward, quiet revolution in hygiene, all coated with a veneer of civility. The faces behind the blurred shadows seemed faintly amused, as if expecting this slow, humorous upheaval to quietly fade away. Time settled over the story, and the initial sparks of tension slowly mellowed into calm acceptance. Chamber pots, whether of pewter or ceramic, found their place beside the flickering hearths and heavy curtains, becoming merely human details, small, imperfect things that continued to serve their silent purpose. The courtiers grew more indifferent, their discussions softer now, as practicality outlived the fierce debates of the past. Faces retained their gentle boredom, observing the daily routines with mild humor, recognizing that human habits rarely change all at once. The light cast long shadows on the stone floor, and somewhere in the background, the unseen figures of prophets, once blurred, seemed to nod in quiet approval of this ordinary human progress. Their faces remained hidden, yet somehow their approval felt understated and peaceful. Looking back, it becomes clear that the evolution of chamber pots was more than a matter of comfort. It was a slow, imperfect dance with progress itself. A humble story of human adaptability, of fascination, resistance, irony, and eventual calm acceptance, etched softly into the stone walls of history. Perhaps, in the quiet moments of the day, those long-departed courtiers and servants shared a faint smile, knowing that such small acts of change, like passing from fixed garderobes to portable pots, are quietly woven into the larger fabric of human imperfection and resilience. With open, unremarkable faces, they continued doing what humans do, adapting, resisting, joking, and enduring, until the next small change awaited in the shadows of everyday life. In the dim corridors of ancient castles, the notion of personal hygiene was often confined to simple, somewhat awkward inventions. An unassuming corner with rough stone walls, where the first humble garderobes were hung, often little more than wooden boxes with slats. These early contraptions, neglected and occasionally smelly, marked the beginning of a long, slow human effort to tame the fortress's unsightly demands. The castle's inhabitants moved through these spaces with quiet resignation, their senses dulled by the unchanging routines of disposal. It was an ordinary necessity, yet a quietly enduring testament to how humans tried, amid stone and mortar, to preserve a fragile sense of comfort. Perhaps even then, the simple act of relieving oneself carried a trace of human longing for dignity amidst the mundane and the unremarkable. As centuries unfurled, a subtle tension grew within castle walls, an awareness that these primitive setups could not keep up with the rising expectations of comfort and civility. The garderobes developed into indoor privies, small chambers discreetly built into the stone fabric, their wooden seats often lined with parchment or cloth as makeshift hygiene measures. Yet these too had their flaws, spilling odors into the narrow corridors, inviting a kind of quiet irony. The more private the chamber became, the more stubborn the smell persisted. The castle's architects, ever the careful planners, began experimenting with rudimentary drainage and ventilation, if only slightly. These efforts betrayed a quiet hope to bridge the gap between necessity and dignity, even as the humbleness of a chamber pot remained ever present in the background, an unspoken fixture of castle life. By the Renaissance, the castle's approach to personal sanitation had woven together hygienic innovation with a gentle irony. Chamber pots, indoor privies, and rudimentary plumbing, often intertwined in a hybrid system that was as much about human convenience as it was about adaptation. Pottery vessels replaced wooden buckets, their rounded forms sitting quietly in bedroom corners, waiting for their turn. Some chambers boasted patchy and inconsistent drainage systems, often more a matter of hope than of reliable technology, while the ubiquitous chamber pot became a symbol of quiet resilience in castle daily life. The sounds of water tinkling and the soft scraping of porcelain edged into the castle's muted sounds, mundane, yet profoundly human in their persistence. A delicate dance between progress and compromise. This became the understated backbone of castle interiors, shaping a new patina of dignity within stone walls. Slowly, there was a calming acceptance in these spaces, an unspoken acknowledgement that comfort in a castle was not solely about grandeur, but also about small human routines and their quiet adaptation. The filled chamber pots were carried to distant ditches or sinks, sometimes with a sigh of resignation, sometimes with a faint trace of humor at the absurdity of it all. The stone corridors echoed softly with footsteps, and the faint scent of soap and dampness mingled, a reminder that humans, even in their most fortified spaces, remained imperfect, striving for better without quite achieving it. Over time, these systems became less of a problem and more a part of the castle's subtle rhythm, mundane routines that, although uncelebrated, provided a modest form of comfort amid the austerity of stone. In the stillness of these spaces, one could sense the quiet persistence of human dignity, wrapped in irony and patience. Today, The lingering imprint of that slow evolution can be seen in modern plumbing, but perhaps more profoundly in the very idea of comfort that we now often take for granted. The once crude garderobes, humble chamber pots, and patchwork systems laid the groundwork for the sophisticated conveniences we now overlook, but also reveal the quiet endurance of human ingenuity. Castles, with their thick walls and shadowed corners, whisper stories of small daily acts, of patience in imperfection, and of a long journey from necessity to comfort. The faces of those who once relied on these simple devices are blurred, only remembered in their soft, slightly humorous silence, and in that there is a gentle reminder that progress, even in the mundane, carries the quiet grace of perseverance, an enduring, if modest, part of our shared human story. In the hushed corners of the grand palace, beneath the gleaming throne room, lie the unseen chambers where King Alaric and his queen clear their minds from the burdens of court life. The vaulted space, dimly lit by a small, flickering torch, holds a simple wooden bench and a stone basin, parts of a private ritual almost forgotten in the busy flicker of official endeavors. It is here, in this quiet recess, that the monarch momentarily escapes the weight of crowns and ceremonies, seeking a fleeting moment of normalcy amidst the gold and velvet, the faint sound of water echoing softly, the faint scent of wax candles creates a peculiar sanctuary in the midst of splendor. These hidden rooms remind us that even atop thrones, humans share an intimate, mundane rhythm of daily existence, quietly enduring the same quiet inconveniences as everyone else. Yet, as the palace's routines deepen, so does the awareness of the fragile veneer of royal perfection. Whispers circulate among courtiers about the secret chamber's existence. Cloaked in deliberate discretion, the trusted retainer, who attends both king and queen, moves with a measured calm, well aware of the gossip beneath hushed words and sideways glances. There is a tension woven into this shared silence, a quiet acknowledgement that even rulers, in their rare moments of privacy, face the unremarkable struggles of their bodies. The palace walls hold their whispered truths. There's an irony in the grandeur of monarchy, shaded by the simplicity of human needs. The invisible burden of maintaining dignity in these personal acts becomes another subtle role of service, unseen yet persistently felt. Sometimes the irony of the situation draws gentle smiles, as courtiers imagine the monarch's surprise if they knew how mundane their private moments truly were. The image of a regal figure, seated on a simple wooden bench, wiping a brow or adjusting their vestments, contrasts sharply with the grandiosity outside the chamber's stone threshold. Portraits and tapestries celebrate divine right and eternal rule. Yet within these silent halls, rulers are merely people, faintly bored, quietly human, engaged in a routine no different from common folk, only cloaked in velvet and gilded gold. The faint sound of shuffling feet outside reminds one that even in solitude, the king's formality persists, a necessary mask for the inevitable realities of human fragility. Here, behind the heavy door, the contradictions of power soften into shared vulnerability. Finally, this quiet space becomes a symbol of shared human imperfection, an unspoken memory tucked away beneath layers of history and ceremony. The chamber, once merely a functional necessity, now stands as a testament to the quiet resilience of daily life, a reminder that every person, regardless of station, bears the same simple needs. The scent of damp stone and wax candles lingers as a gentle, unpretentious whisper of authenticity. It offers a moment, and perhaps a lesson, that beneath the glitter, even kings and queens are quietly humble, living stories filled with small, mundane truths. These fleeting, unnoticed acts of humanity thread quietly through the grand tapestry of history, anchoring sovereignty in the universal soil of human experience. In the end, one might reflect that these hidden chambers, modest as they are, embody the gentle humdrum of life itself, an ongoing ode to the fact that everyone, even monarchs, lives in the gentle rhythm of routine. The palace's secret depths hold 1,000 silent stories of ordinary human moments, cocooned in splendor, but grounded in simple necessity. Perhaps, in these quiet acts, there lies a quiet dignity, an enduring reminder that transparency and humility flourish in shared human vulnerability. As the palace's lights fade into the gentle dusk of history, the calm persistence of these tiny, overlooked acts continues to speak softly of what it means to be truly human, both in glitter and in solitude. In the quiet illuminescence of early mornings, the royal chambers prepared for the ritual of cleansing. The queen, with measured patience, had commissioned a discreet alchemist to craft fragrant oils and herbal infusions, each drop carefully measured into silver bowls that gleamed softly. The baths, lined with smooth silk and warmed by hidden fires, became sanctuaries of gentle luxury, where the noble sought refuge from the weight of their crowns in shimmering water and delicate scents. It was a world of small, deliberate movements, cloths unfolding, water softly pouring, fragrant mists curling through the air, unfolding like a slow, familiar dance. Despite the grandeur, there was an echo of quiet practicality in every detail, reminding all that comfort bore its own humble toil. As the days lengthened, a subtle tension emerged, threading its way through the routines of royal hygiene. king, often pondering in his study, now found himself entangled in the logistics of maintaining this delicate routine, ensuring silk-lined towels were replenished, and fresh water flowed steadily, unceasingly. Servants moved with a quiet urgency, filling baths and changing linens. Yet the network of pipes and waterways beyond the chamber seemed a stubborn paradox of effort and persistence. The realism of endless chores persisted behind the scenes, casting a shadow of mundane responsibility over what otherwise appeared an effortless tableau of opulence. It became clear that even the most splendid comfort needed vigilant, often unseen, tending. There was an irony that bloomed softly amid these noble efforts. The queen's alchemist, tasked with conjuring fragrant oils, had recently added a new infusion, an aromatic blend that wafted more strongly than intended, causing the chamber to fill with a scent of herbs and smoke. The royal attendants, half asleep and mildly amused, tried to mask their smirks as they adjusted the burners and dabbed at the air, knowing the fragrant offerings now added a touch of humor to the otherwise solemn routine. Meanwhile, the king, unfamiliar with such matters, sometimes wondered aloud whether all this effort might be more suited to a bathhouse than a palace, chuckling softly at the absurdity of noble fuss over mere cleanliness. In sleepy humor, the grand facade of regal self-sufficiency wavered slightly. Over time, an air of calm settled over the palace's small daily rituals. The baths, now carefully maintained, became quiet retreats amid the bustling corridors of power. Servants moved with familiar ease, water pipes whispering softly as they provided a constant stream of fresh water, and silk towels hung like tranquil banners, albeit slightly wrinkled from repeated use. The queen's infusions, though sometimes imperfect, filled the space with calming aromas that mingled with the soft flicker of candlelight. The king, observing from a distance, recognized a kind of peaceful ordinariness in these acts, small, human efforts that tethered grandeur to habit, reminding him that even splendor is woven from simple routines. There was a profound stillness in these moments of quiet upkeep. In the muted light of late afternoon, the palace's private spaces settled into gentle repose, reflecting the slow, unvaried rhythm of human needs. The routines of hygiene, with their humble tasks and quiet imperfections, bound the royal life to something universally human, an acknowledgement that comfort, no matter how silk-lined or fragrant, rests on steady, often unseen work. The blurred faces of those who maintained these rituals remained in shadow, their humble labor a silent testament to the delicate balance between opulence and practicality. Perhaps, in these small acts, there was a subtle reminder, behind every bath of silk and every herbal scent, the true essence of human dignity quietly persisted in the mundane. And so, amid storied splendor, life moved on slow, steady, mildly amused at its own effort. In the quiet corners of the palace, years ago, the royal privy was not just a functional space, but a symbol of status and underlying humanness. Lavishly decorated with carved stone and scented oils, it was a place where the monarch's daily routines remained hidden behind heavy curtains and discreet servants. Diplomats and courtiers often wondered about the side chambers of power. Yet no one truly knew the ritual secrets kept within these private walls. Though mundane in purpose, the privy represented a boundary between the king's public authority and his private, unspoken needs. It was a quiet reminder that even royalty, in their stained glass and velvet, shared the same simple bodily truths as others do in the silence of their own homes. One day, a neighboring duke, intrigued by tales of the kingdom's famed sanitation practices, formally requested access, perhaps imagining secrets of royal hygiene as a kind of treasure. Palace scribes and officials debated quietly, some amused and others disapproving of what seemed like a breach of dignity. The king's steward, with an uncertain voice, explained that such spaces were not for outsiders. Yet the duke's insistence sparked whispers of diplomatic bother, as the matter fluttered through courtiers' ears like a breath of unrest beneath the grand chandeliers. The distant whisper of potential negotiations hovered with the faint scent of diplomacy, tangled with the mundane realities of maintaining the royal privy's elaborate plumbing systems. Behind curtain-draped chambers, the palace staff felt the subtle weight of fragile trust, stretched thin over porcelain bowls and lead pipes. As the days passed, a peculiar irony unfolded among the palace's busy maintenance staff. Costly upkeep was a constant struggle, for even royal toilets required delicate repairs, sensitive cleaning, and expensive materials. The servants' hands became stained with soap and dirt, their quiet murmurs slipping into the background noise of the grand hallways. Meanwhile, the court's intrigue deepened. Whispers circulated about overlooked leaks and the mounting expenses, as if even waste and water carried the silent humor of fragile human vanity. An accidental leak, small yet persistent, sprung in a forgotten corner, threatening to expose the secret routines of the king to prying eyes if it worsened. There was a strange humor, perhaps unintentional, in how such mundane machinery held the delicate balance of dignity and inconvenience amid the grandeur. The palace, like all human endeavors, was imperfect, its plumbing confessing quietly to the grand design's inherent flaws. Eventually, the leak was contained, and the scandal dissolved into the hum of daily life as the royal routines pressed on with muted dignity. The king, in his quiet chamber, continued to govern with a calm presence, unaware or perhaps amused by the small fuss over his private needs. Outside, courtly life moved at its slow, measured pace, punctuated only by the faint clatter of keys and the distant murmur of officials discussing repairs. It seemed that, beyond the veneer of power and protocol, everyone shared the same basic rhythm, waiting, repairing, returning to the quiet solitude of personal routines. In the calm that followed, the absurdity settled like dust, reminding everyone that even in the most exalted halls, daily life carried its subtle humor and humble truths. The colonial magic of monarchy persisted, quietly waiting for the next small scandal or repair job, as human and flawed as ever. Reflecting on these stories, it becomes clear that the private spaces of kings and queens reveal more about their humanity than their crowns do. Behind the polished walls and gilded ornamentation, there is a steady rhythm of everyday life, simple acts, mundane repairs, silent negotiations beneath the surface. The bathroom routines, secret leaks, and costly maintenance remind us that power, after all, rests in small, often unnoticed details. Those quiet moments when humans confront their shared imperfections with patience and a gentle, ironic humor. Perhaps, in the end, the true monarchy is a quiet acceptance of these simple truths, held together by routine, maintenance, and a capacity to endure the inevitable embarrassments with a calm, amused silence. The story of royal hygiene, in its modest way, offers a glimpse into the universal experience of being human in a world that never quite manages to stay perfectly clean or perfectly hidden. In the quiet corridors of the palace, it was easy to overlook the small rituals of hygiene that lingered in the daily lives of the royal family. The king and queen, surrounded by silken cloth and ornate furnishings, went about their routines with a quiet dignity that masked an unspoken reliance on tradition rather than health. Perhaps it was the faint scent of rosewater or the gentle splash of warm water in the royal baths that seemed to promise cleanliness without much thought to the unseen currents beneath. And so, life flowed with a kind of comfortable neglect, each noble step echoing softly against stone walls that had seen centuries pass in stillness. But beneath this calm, the human need for protection and foresight remained, quietly waiting to be acknowledged. Then, unexpectedly, a mysterious illness began to ripple through the court, dulling the usual courtly chatter and planting whispers of concern into hushed corners. The royal physicians, buried in scrolls and familiar with the slow rhythms of their remedies, traced the epidemic back with hesitant certainty. Contaminated water in the baths, the palace's ornate plumbing, once a marvel of comfort, now revealed its dark side, as droplets and pores of unclear origin poisoned the very source of royal relaxation. The king, with his brow furrowed beneath a crown that felt suddenly too heavy, saw the subtle irony in the moment. How fragile the veneer of civilization truly was when confronted with a simple, neglected truth. The court servants moved quietly, their faces shadowed, but their eyes observant. As the hazard grew more undeniable, irony settled like a soft fog over the palace. As the royal attendants, once so meticulous in appearances, now scrambled to contain a crisis rooted in their own familiarity with the very water meant to purify. The king and queen, faces shadowed by the flickering candles of their private chamber, watched as the court scrambled to implement emergency rituals, quick rinses, hurried purification, and hastily drawn up remedies. The scenes played out with a strange sort of calm, faint sounds of cloth swishing, whispers of apology, and the clinking of vessels being sterilized. Yet beneath it all was a gentle satire on human blindness. Despite the grandeur surrounding them, the true vulnerability was in the mundane, overlooked details of everyday life. It was a quiet lesson in humility, delivered in the language of water and neglect. Gradually, the palace settled into a slower rhythm as the purification rituals took hold and the water's clarity was restored, both literally and metaphorically. The king, now seated beside his queen, observed the silent effort of technicians, their faces blurred behind work-worn masks, as they loosened the chains of contaminated waters. The palace's once cluttered baths now steamed quietly, filled with warm, purified fluid, an almost humbling moment of restored calm. Sunlight seeped softly through high windows, casting gentle shadows on tired marble floors, while the courtiers resumed their subdued activities, now more aware of the fragile link between hygiene and health. The quiet of that day became a gentle reminder that even the mighty must sometimes submit to the simple act of cleansing. Looking back, it was a minor crisis, yet it revealed a universal truth: how easily neglect can creep into the routines of comfort, and how critical awareness remains amid apparent grandeur. The royal incident, at its core, was a reflection of human fallibility, wrapped in a routine so natural it was almost invisible. As the palace returned to its usual calm, with soft footsteps and distant murmurs, one could sense a subtle, enduring lesson that humility and attention to the small, unseen details of life are essential, even for those at the top. The story of the contaminated water, quietly chronicled by history, whispers with a gentle irony, reminding us that beneath every noble act lies a simple human need for care and caution, always worth remembering. In the quiet corridors of history's grandest houses, the topic of personal hygiene was often overlooked amid the pomp and ceremony. Kings and queens, cloaked in robes of authority, seemingly presided over rituals that betrayed a simple human reality. Many of them endured baths infrequently, often relying on scented wipes or perfumed powders. Yet, as the years went by, a subtle awareness grew that cleanliness was not just a matter of vanity, but health, especially in halls where hundreds of courtiers moved through the same air. A soft, persistent pressure for reform began to ripple through the royal chambers, not with grand proclamations, but through small, persistent adjustments that quietly changed lives. It was in these tentative steps, introducing routine baths and better drainage, that history began to touch even the most ornate of private spaces. The tension behind these reforms was almost invisible. It lurked in the reluctant acceptance of new routines. Kings and queens, accustomed to centuries of neglect or tradition, now faced the awkward necessity of scheduling their own cleanliness, complete with attendants and newly installed copper pipes that clattered softly as water flowed, an odd symphony of progress. The transition was neither swift nor entirely smooth. Some courtiers found the new regimens inconvenient, and there were quiet debates over etiquette, what was proper, what was modest, and what simply made sense. Ironies arose as old habits clashed with emerging standards. The once proud monarch now spooned warm water over their shoulders, occasionally frowning at the unfamiliar sensation. Yet, in this slow fraying of old customs, a foundation was laid for future generations' understanding of dignity in hygiene. As the reforms took hold, the irony of royal cleanliness became quietly apparent to all who observed. Behind the heavy velvet curtains and gilded mirrors, rulers were becoming more mundane, their routines less mysterious and more human, perhaps even a little humorous. The same kings who once refused to acknowledge their own dirt now read etiquette manuals that emphasized modesty and modesty's surprising emphasis on soap and warmth. Stories circulated in whispers, some of awkward splashing, others of regal patience during lengthy scrubs, forming a kind of mundane legend that softened the grand veneer. The collection of ordinary, unglamorous moments illustrated that power, after all, did not exempt one from simple needs. It merely cloaked them in ritual. These small acts of self-care, once hidden behind closed doors, began to hint at a shared human truth, that cleanliness was a quiet, universal bond. With time, the emphasis on health and routine brought a calm, almost meditative quality to the royal chambers. Copper piping gleamed softly in the candlelight, and the sound of running water became as regular and reassuring as the ticking clock. Monarchs and their attendants moved through their hygiene routines with gentle patience, each act a small meditation against the chaos of court life. They learned to accept the ordinary as a part of their identity, no longer ashamed of these moments of vulnerability. The unspoken acknowledgement of shared human frailty fostered a softer, more reflective attitude among the court, perhaps even a quiet humility. It was a modest, enduring legacy that even those at the top are touched by the same simple routines that quietly keep societies functioning. In the end, the slow, deliberate reforms of royal hygiene left a gentle imprint on history, less a story of grandeur than one of quiet progress. As distant shadows settled into the evening, these once ephemeral customs became woven into the fabric of everyday life, captured in artifacts and forgotten in the slow wear of time. The kings and queens, blurred by age and age-old light, left behind a legacy not of perfect cleanliness, but of earnest effort and subtle humility. This unassuming chapter reminds us that even history's rulers are just passing figures, bathing, balancing, and sometimes amusing themselves in the simple act of caring for their bodies. And perhaps in that small truth lie the most enduring lessons about human frailty and dignity. In the sleepy town of Ravensgate, the new steward Sir Aldrich wandered through the cobbled market square one morning, eyes drifting over the sluggish, foul streams that tangled beneath wooden stalls. The air hung thick with the scent of decaying vegetables and muddy water, a constant reminder of the town's forgotten waste. The castle moat, once a clear refuge, now seemed more like a sluggish mirror of mud and algae, its stagnant water whispering of neglect. Aldrich's brow furrowed ever so slightly as he noted the layers of refuse drifting in slow motion, quietly accumulating. An unspectacular day, but a beginning to understanding how the town's foundation seemed steadily built on filth, quite invisible, yet deeply felt. As days passed, Aldrich's observations grew more meticulous, and he began to notice the slow but inevitable rising tension in the community. The merchants complained of slipping stones and foul odors choking their deliveries, while children dared each other to wade through the sticky puddles of refuse in the squares. One morning, a small stream of sewage managed to seep from the alleyway, creeping coyly towards the central well, which supplied the entire town. The realization dawned with a quiet, almost humorous irony. Their bustling life depended on a fragile, unseen network of dirt and neglect, quietly threatening to unravel beneath their feet, yet no one seemed entirely surprised. This was the reality they had long accepted, or at least tolerated, amidst the slow march of disrepair. A certain irony emerged as the townsfolk lazily discussed remedies, imagining grand sewers or floating islands of refuse, while ignoring the obvious. A local craftsman, with a grin half hidden in shadow by the low evening light, joked about building each house on a raft to escape the mud. Meanwhile, Aldrich privately chuckled at how their noble efforts to hide their waste only created more convoluted, ineffective solutions, like digging holes that merely filled with refuse and became, eventually, indifferent ponds. The more they thought about it, the more evident it became that their progress was a dance of slow, calculated absurdity, each attempt merely reshuffling the problem. Still, no urgent panic took hold, only a gentle shrug of collective resignation. With the passing of seasons, the town's atmosphere settled into a quiet acceptance, as if the slow, rotting rhythm of life was simply nature taking its course. Aldrich, now a familiar face in the markets and castle halls, observed how the lazy flow of waste made way for the everyday rituals of life, people eating, talking, and resting amidst the subtle, ever-present hum of decay. The moat, though murky and still, became just another feature of the landscape, like the old stone walls that once defined battle lines, now softened by time and grime. There was no frantic effort to clean or fix, rather a calm coexistence with the filth, woven into the fabric of daily existence. It seemed, perhaps, the town had long since surrendered to the quiet dignity of their dirty world. Reflecting quietly on this slow, unremarkable story, one might sense that beneath the layers of neglect lies a profound lesson in patience and imperfection. Ravensgate's waste, both underground and within its waters, served as a subtle mirror to human resilience and the strange comfort of accepting life's small, ongoing messes. The blurred faces of the villagers, their simple routines, and the faintly tired sky remind us that human efforts are often modest, and progress, a slow, tentative process, may be all we can hope for. In the end, the town's hidden, humbling filth quietly persisted, just like human memory, faint, stubborn, and quietly enduring amid the slow passage of time. In the quiet hours of late spring, Master Mason alone stood beneath the soft glow of oil lamps, her hands resting on stacks of smooth, cold stones. She had assembled her team in the town square, their faces blurred by the flickering shadows as they prepared to begin carving the network of stone-lined sewers that would run beneath the narrow streets. There was a certain calm in the routine, measured, deliberate, each hammer strike echoing a quiet certainty. The townsfolk watched from a distance, their superstitions whispering in their minds about what lay beneath the ground they walked every day. For now, it was just stone, anticipation, and the slow, patient promise of progress. As the work progressed, tensions grew quietly in the background. Engineers had diverted part of the rushing river, trying to deepen the moat that encircled the castle. But the rocky terrain proved stubborn, resisting both effort and ingenuity. Sometimes the water stalled or shifted course unexpectedly, splashing the eager scribbles of plans with muddy frustration. Meanwhile, a rival noble nearby watched from afar, casting subtly sabotaging glances, removing tools, whispering doubts, trying to undermine the moderate hope that something useful might emerge from the slow labor. The workers, burdened with the weight of unspoken rivalry, moved patiently, knowing that progress, like water, found its own way around obstacles. There was an odd irony in the efforts to control nature. The diverted river, intended to flush the moat reliably, often seemed to mock the attempts, its gentle trickle occasionally turning into a hesitant drizzle or a sudden swell that threatened to undo the fragile work. Peasants, ever superstitious, muttered about the spirits of the water and the unseen eyes of those who dared to interfere. The rival nobles' schemes sometimes caused setbacks, piles of stones misplaced, channels blocked, but in the slow, measured exchanges of human effort, a strange sense of absurdity unfurled. The workmen would shrug at each other, their faces mildly bored, as if amused by the persistent absurdity of human meddling in the flow of natural things. Over time, the town grew accustomed to the murmurs of the river and the low hum of the sewer construction. Eloin's team covered the underground passages in earthen layers, their hands gliding over cold, rough stones, their faces often peaceful in the stillness after a long day. The diverted water occasionally ran clear and steady, bringing a faint sense of stability that seemed almost too good to be true. The rival nobles' efforts waned, becoming less conspicuous, lost in the slow tide of everyday life. Perhaps, in this quiet, unglamorous progress, there was a form of gentle harmony, an acceptance that human attempts to master nature moved at their own unhurried pace, often with small, unnoticed steps. Looking back, the story of the castle's drainage and the town's underground passages felt like a quiet act of persistence in the face of nature's gentle indifference. Eloin and her laborers had carved beneath the soil, diverted a stubborn river, and endured petty rivalries that slowly faded into the background hum of daily existence. The sewage system, the moat, these were not grand stories of heroism, but rather a testament to human patience and imperfection, an acknowledgement that progress often unfolded in small, understated ways. In the end, perhaps what lingered was the shared, gentle understanding that even the most mundane efforts carried a quiet dignity. Like all human endeavors, trying to hold entropy at bay for just a little longer. In the quiet hours of late afternoon, the castle's new sewer conduits lay nearly finished, their dark stone arches promising a cleaner, more predictable flow beneath the cobbled streets. The townsfolk, momentarily relieved by the progress, carried on their modest daily routines, tending to gardens, washing cloths by the well, and exchanging quiet words about how things might finally improve. The air carried a faint scent of damp earth, and the distant murmur of workmen polishing stones or adjusting the ropes. It was an ordinary day, tinged with a subtle hope that the old mess might soon be managed with less chaos. Yet, as shadows lengthened and the sunset light poured over the town, a gentle warning awaited beneath the surface that not all plans are immune to the slow, unyielding tide of reality. Late that evening, a shift in the water's song disturbed the calm. The first signs of trouble as dark, rushing water seeped into the workings of the incomplete sewer system. It was as if the ground itself remembered the old floodwaters, and with little warning, the rising currents overran the shallow trenches, spilling onto the market square's edges. Merchants hurried with hurried whispers, eyes fixed on the murky chaos threatening to swamp their stalls and goods. The unfinished stones trembled under the weight of the flood, more immediate and persistent than any previous nuisance. Sir Aldrich, standing at the edge amid the turmoil, felt the slow erosion of confidence. Yet he knew panic would only deepen the trouble. So he steadied his voice and began to organize the uneasy gathering. Ironically, just as the townsfolk gathered their courage and began moving towards the problem, the floodwaters seemed almost to mock their efforts, swirling stubbornly around the unfinished segments of the sewer and splashing over the moat's edge. Children watched in wide-eyed fascination, and old men cracked jokes about how the river itself must have been tired of waiting. The moat, intended as a barrier against enemies, now threatened to overflow, creating a muddy border that muddled the boundaries of safety and chaos. Sir Aldrich's negotiation with the rival noble, normally a dull affair marked by formal words and faded seals, became suddenly more urgent, as both parties realized that their shared discomfort might foster last-minute cooperation. Amidst the irony of progress, drowned in its infancy, a quiet resolve emerged among the assembled faces. As night fell, the waters gradually subsided, leaving behind a thick coating of mud and a softer silence. The market, once vibrant with life and commerce, now lay scattered with debris and broken wooden crates. In this calm aftermath, the townsfolk moved slowly through the mess, their movements sluggish but purposeful, aware that tomorrow's tasks would be harder but necessary. Sir Aldrich, seated beside a dim lantern, reflected quietly on the fickle nature of progress, how even the most carefully laid plans could drown beneath the weight of unforeseen forces. The shadows of the incomplete sewer still loomed, but so did a sense of cautious patience, like the slow return of dawn after a long, uneven night. There was no true solution yet, only gentle acceptance of human limits. In the gentle stillness of early morning, the town hesitated to speak of the flood as more than a minor setback. The men and women watched the now still waters lap softly at the muddy banks, contemplating the days ahead with quiet resignation. The unfinished sewer remained a reminder of human effort mixed with unpredictable nature, a story of progress interrupted and patience tested. Sir Aldrich, his face blurred in the low light, but marked by mild determination, recognized that the real lesson was in persistence, not in speed or perfection. Perhaps, he mused softly, some processes are slow so that they may be appreciated in their quiet humility. As the town settled into another day, the distant horizon hinted at slow, inevitable change, like the tide that comes just enough to remind us of nature's gentle, enduring rhythm. In the quiet of early morning, the castle's moat lay still, its muddy banks gently reflecting the soft, diffuse light coming over the stone walls. The laborers, clad in simple tunics, moved slowly along the high wooden walkways, inspecting the stone-lined sewer openings that snaked beneath the castle grounds. It was an ordinary day, with the usual sounds of water lapping and faint hum of conversation. As humanity adjusted the delicate balance of their medieval waste management, no one expected that the serenity, sustained by routine, was about to be disrupted by a looming storm and a growing tension beneath the surface. Life moved quietly, even in the shadowed corners of history, where problems waited patiently to unfold. As dark clouds gathered overhead and thunder rumbled in the distance, the castle's engineers hurried to prepare for what was likely to be a difficult day. The great floodgates, massive wood and iron barriers meant to control the river's flow into the moat, were slowly being opened, an act of mundane precision that now seemed almost deliberate in its calm. Meanwhile, beneath the castle walls, the rival noble saboteurs moved silently, their small, uncertain footsteps echoing the nervous energy of clandestine plans. The tunnel they aimed to collapse was just a few yards away, hidden beneath the stone floors, a fragile thread in the complex web of medieval plumbing and power. The anticipation thickened in the air. weighed down by the silent inevitability of conflict. It was an almost humorous irony, both sides yearning for control over the same water, yet caught in a slow, almost comical dance of sabotage and salvation. The floodgates, once opened, revealed their heavy, creaking arms to the storm's onset, releasing a rush of water that echoed through the stone corridors, a raw and droning sound. Simultaneously, the saboteurs' efforts to undermine the sewer tunnel pressed into a dangerous crescendo. Small tools tapping and shifting the brittle stone outside the castle's secret pathways. Beneath that calm surface, small moments of chaos unfolded, one side trying to steady the flood, the other attempting discreet destruction. Each move, quiet and deliberate, seemed oddly infused with the strange humor of human miscalculation. As the storm reached its peak, a pause settled, an uneasy stillness that seemed to stretch between rain and wind. The floodgates finally creaked fully open, redirecting the river's flow through a broader channel, flooding the moat in a relentless, slow surge. Below, the secret tunnels teetered on the edge of collapse, moments away from chaos, as the saboteurs' efforts battled the relentless pressure of the water above. The engineers, watching from a safe distance, displayed a calm that hinted at their weary familiarity with such tense situations, their faces blurred by the shadows cast from their lanterns. It was as if history itself took a pause, bemused by human stubbornness, waiting patiently for the inevitable culmination to unfold in its own quiet time. Eventually, the storm passed, leaving behind a softened landscape, waterlogged earth, and damp stone, both exhausted witnesses to the ordeal. The floodgates, now silent, rested in their open position, eyes blank and heavy with age, as the moat gradually settled into its new, more turbulent rhythm. Beneath the castle, the collapsed sewer tunnel was discovered, an unremarkable discovery that seemed oddly fitting for a day when human efforts met the slow, indifferent march of water and stone. The workers, tired but unperturbed, resumed their routines with a resigned sense of continuity. In these moments of calm returned, there was a quiet appreciation for the mundane resilience of medieval life, imperfect, uncertain, yet somehow enduring. In the quiet hours of the early medieval city, the townsfolk went about their routines with a delicate awareness of their common discomforts. Street noises were muffled by soft footsteps on cobblestone, and the faint smell of waste lingered just beneath the surface of daily life. They knew well enough that waste had to go somewhere, yet no one spoke loudly of the process. It was the invisible burden of their existence. The village's moat, a broad strip of water encircling the castle, felt like a natural boundary, both protective and subtly oppressive as it bore the weight of accumulated refuse and rain. Still, beginnings are often hesitant, and the idea of structured waste management remained a distant, almost ironic aspiration amid their immediate survival. There was an unspoken understanding that the river, slow and persistent, carried away what could not be contained within the city walls. Over time, small efforts emerged: wooden sluice gates, rudimentary drainage ditches. Yet they often faltered during storms, or ignored the quiet logic of cleanliness. The villagers found themselves caught between tradition and necessity, as the overflowing moat threatened to spill its murky secrets into the cultivated lands. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, with a few voices suggesting that order might serve not just health, but the prosperity of trade, which depended on steady, predictable flow. When the river threatened to flood over, the townspeople watched with cautious patience as floodgates were lowered, and the waters receded, leaving behind a clean, if still slightly tired, landscape. Though simple, these measures marked a turning point, an acknowledgement that human effort could harness and tame the slow, unyielding river of waste. There was a certain irony in the quiet triumph of stone and mortar over the chaos of refuse. The once haphazard disposal methods giving way to orderly sewer systems and well-placed moats. Skilled craftsmen carved channels into the stone, creating drainage that could be maintained with minimal fuss. Yet the effort was humbling in its restraint. Townsfolk watched as the canals carried away waste with a steady sigh, their surfaces cool and predictable beneath the soft sun. Celebrations arose, not loud festivals, but modest nods of approval for Sir Aldrich and Aloin, who had overseen the improvements with patience, and a faint smile of irony, for in their calm, pragmatic work, the city learned that discipline in waste management did more than maintain health. It quietly protected the legacy they clung to with both hope and resignation. As seasons passed, the mundane rhythm of cleaning and maintaining the sewer networks became part of everyday life, an unspoken ritual shared among workers and villagers alike. The moat, once a murky source of concern, now reflected a clearer sky, while the stone sewers below kept the quiet, unceasing hum of their work beyond sight. In moments of stillness, residents would pause at the side of the canal, hearing only the faint splash of water and the soft footsteps of another day unfolding. The kingdom's understanding had deepened, that order and discipline in waste management formed a fragile but essential safeguard against disease and decay. Yet, beneath all this, there remained an understated humor, a shared acknowledgement that, despite their efforts, human life was always a little messy, and that was perfectly okay. Looking back, The people of the city seemed to carry a gentle wisdom, that life's small routines, like draining a moat or repairing a sewer, are the quiet acts that preserve both health and history. The blurred faces of prophets or leaders faded into the light and shadow of their efforts, leaving behind only the evidence of their work in stone and water. Now, in this stillness, the city rests beneath a soft evening glow, silent and unassuming, knowing that time moves at its own unhurried pace. Their story is one of ordinary persistence, of keeping the waters clear, and the conscience lighter, reminding us that even the humblest tasks have a quiet dignity. And so, with gentle patience, the city waits for what tomorrow might bring, just as it always has, enduring all with a calm that feels as timeless as the flowing river. In the quiet heart of Eldermore's ancient stone walls, Lady Myrle ventured into the castle's hidden wings with tentative curiosity. Her eyes caught the darkened passages leading to the old garderobes, tall stone chambers that once echoed with the sounds of daily necessity. The air was cool and dry, carrying whispers of centuries past as she traced the worn stone steps beneath her fingertips. It was here, in these quiet corners, that the subtle divisions of gender had long shaped daily routines, etched into the fabric of castle life. She wondered how the simplicity of a wall or a door could carry such unspoken distinctions across ages, quietly shaping human habits in the shadows of grandeur. As Lady Myrle lingered, she began to notice the small, persistent disparities. The slightly larger spaces designated for men's garderobes, and the tucked-away alcoves reserved for women. The air seemed to hold an unspoken tension, as if the walls themselves bore the weight of tradition. A faint breeze slipped through the tiny cracks, whispering softly of the centuries that kept these customs alive, yet also hinting at their fragility. She imagined the voices, the hurried movements of castle servants, and the reluctant acceptance of these borders, quietly reaffirmed over generations. The contrast struck her slowly, like the silent irony threaded through daily life, unnoticed but ever present. One could hardly miss the ironic clarity of it, how such a simple bodily function had been draped in layers of gendered expectation and spatial separation. Outside, the castle's courtyards buzzed with life, but inside, these chambers held a different rhythm, a quiet, organized ritual of segregation. Lady Myrle chuckled softly to herself, amused by how human absurdity persisted even into the most mundane moments. The walls, once purposeful guardians of modesty, now seemed to silently mock the idea that nature itself could be divided by architecture alone. Somewhere, unseen and unfathomable, the faces of prophets and rulers blurred behind veiled light, silent witnesses to these humble divisions. Returning from her exploration, Lady Myrle felt a gentle calm settling over her, an acceptance of the slow, imperfect march of change. The castle's age-old customs clung to its stones, yet they also seemed to soften under the weight of time. She observed the worn, familiar contours of the chambers, recognizing that their quiet carelessness preserved an odd kind of stability, one that balanced tradition with the inevitable drift toward practicality. The distinctions persisted, but they no longer seemed as rigid. Perhaps this was the subtle way human life evolved, through gentle adaptation rather than upheaval. Inside these quiet spaces, she found a mirror of human resilience, an imperfect harmony of age, habit, and the quiet hope for subtle change. As she moved away from the hidden wings, Lady Myrle reflected on the enduring nature of such customs, woven into the daily fabric of castle life, like the dust motes stirring in slanting sunlight. These chambers, unremarkable yet deeply significant, had quietly charted the boundaries and bonds of generations past. She wondered whether future stewards, perhaps with softer eyes, might someday see them differently, or decide the walls no longer mattered. For now, she understood that in the slow, deliberate rhythm of human routines, there was a kind of peaceful endurance, an acceptance that some divisions, however arbitrary, were woven into the quiet stories of daily life. And thus she left the chambers, softly aware, softly amused, gently inclined to let time continue its quiet work. In the quiet hours of early mornings, the castle's hallways echoed with the low murmur of men preparing for an impending siege. Amid the rustle of chainmail and the clink of boots, the garrison's complaints about overflowing garderobes rose like a subtle tide, a constant reminder of the practical discomforts that shadowed their valiant efforts. Nearby, in more refined chambers, Lady Myrle and the noblewomen gathered with quiet discontent, their eyes cast away from the draughts and the stone floors that offered little warmth or privacy. The tools of hygiene, a simple chamber pot, and a shared wash basin became symbols of a quiet frustration, unspoken but palpable in every shivering breath. As the castle's walls stood silent, so too did the unacknowledged inequalities in their daily routines, a mundane challenge that persisted beyond the threats outside. As days progressed and tensions simmered beneath the surface, voices sharpened in the great hall about fairness, not just of provisions, but of personal spaces and comfort. The soldiers, whose patience for cramped, overflowing garderobes waned with each passing hour, argued that their needs were neglected amid urgent preparations. Meanwhile, Lady Myrle's group voiced concerns about the cold, hard floors that chilled their bones during long, restless nights, and the absence of any semblance of privacy behind carved wooden screens or thick curtains. The debates drifted lazily around the table, lingering over the uncomfortable realities: poor ventilation, the lack of proper facilities that seemed so mundane yet vital. It was a moment of quiet little discontent, stitched together with sighs and hesitant words, hinting at a division rooted not in dispute, but in differing human needs. In the slow drift of afternoon light, irony settled like dust upon the subjects of hygiene. The soldiers, with their exhausted faces and dirt-smudged hands, joked lightly that their overflowing garderobes were perhaps the castle's most plentiful treasure, an unintended abundance of effort left uncontained. The noblewomen, in contrast, eyed their chilly chambers with dry wit, remarking that the cold stone floors made their retreats into privacy more like visits to frosty caves than restful sanctuary. Conversations between the two groups, once heated, mellowed into half-hearted chuckles at the absurdity of their shared predicament. The dull, resigned humor of it all offered a strange comfort, a reminder that everyone, from peak-fortified warriors to noblewomen, was caught in the quiet, unglamorous rhythm of daily life's small, imperfect rituals. By evening, a gentle calm had settled over the castle, as the castellan suggested practical adjustments, more frequent clearing of the garderobes, some woolen rugs to soften the floors, makeshift privacy screens, small steps toward easing the inherent discomforts. The busy hum of daily chores and the dull clatter of utensils against plates created a soothing backdrop, dulling the sharp edges of prior disagreements. Lady Myrle, her face now shadowed by a soft light, listened quietly as a servant explained the simple plan to improve the chamber's warmth and privacy, the words like a slow lull into more tolerable routines. In these moments, the castle's internal tensions softened into an acceptance of human frailty, an acknowledgement that comfort and fairness, like all things, were delicate and fleeting. The castle breathed a gentle, sleepy sigh beneath the weight of its tired stones. Later, as the shadows lengthened and the day's worries drifted away with the evening breeze, the castle seemed to pause in stillness, contemplating the quiet truths of daily life. The story of gender and sanitation, so small and seemingly mundane, highlighted the universal human condition, the continuous balancing act between needs and neglect, comfort and hardship. Perhaps in their slow routines, there was an unspoken lesson about fairness and compassion, quietly etched into the stone walls and softened by human resilience. All their small, imperfect routines, garderobes, private chambers, shared spaces, reminded them that even in the midst of crises, life persisted in the gentle, unremarkable rhythm of everyday human existence, and in that quiet, unassuming continuity, there was something quietly enduring, something worth pondering just a little longer. In the quiet corners of the castle, the idea of a new sanitation system stirred slowly among the oldest stones. Master Mason Aldrich, with his hands weathered from decades of stone and mortar, cautiously unfolded his proposal, a common underground conduit that would serve both men and women, yet with separate access points to accommodate modesty. The council members, their expressions shadowed by age and tradition, listened thoughtfully, though their eyes occasionally flickered with doubt. It was a simple concept, in essence, yet it carried the weight of long-held customs, an unspoken barrier embedded deeply in daily routines. As the sun shed a warm glow across the stone walls, it was clear that these small human acts of hygiene were woven into the fabric of their lives, resistant to swift change. Soon, a gentle tension unfurled in the chamber where voices rose softly, hesitant but insistent. Some argued that tradition demanded clear separation, fearing that shared spaces might erode the privacy they had cherished for generations. Others, meanwhile, viewed the proposal as practical, an improvement born of necessity in times of scarce resources. The women, their faces subtly lined by years of careful observation, voiced their concerns about who would bear the labor, who would dig the tunnels and maintain the system. The men, with their measured tones, debated whether they should be the ones to undertake this task, aware of the humor in the idea, yet cautious of the shift it represented. The air grew thick with polite disagreement, each side reluctant to let go of centuries-old distinctions, even as the notion of a new shared approach quietly persisted beneath the surface. Aldrich's plan, with its simple practicality, was met with a hint of irony by those who watched the negotiations. A shared underground corridor, meant to be a symbol of cooperation, seemed almost mundane, yet subtly rebellious, like a whisper of unity running beneath the castle's bones. The council, wary of breaking tradition, hesitated as they considered the implications. Who would bear the burden of construction, and how might the maintenance be divided? The reasoning seemed almost insignificant next to the nerves about change itself, a slow ripple in a pond that had long been still. Meanwhile, the castle's shadows lengthened, embracing the quiet humor inherent in humans clinging tightly to their customs, even when the future quietly moved forward. Perhaps, they thought, some barriers are easier to dismantle in theory than in practice. Eventually, a calm descended over the assembly, as if the slow passing of time had softened their resolve. A tentative agreement formed not to abandon abandon tradition, but to explore small steps toward integration. Aldrich, with a faint smile, volunteered to oversee the initial work, feeling the weight of history in his bones. The women and men began to see the project not as a threat, but as another thread woven into their daily routines, something ordinary and necessary, much like the worn stones underfoot. The conversation drifted in gentle waves, touching on practicalities rather than passions, as the castle's ancient walls absorbed their quiet deliberations. In this peaceful pause, the human tendency to adapt without fanfare revealed itself, an unspoken mutual understanding that some change, however slow, is simply part of life's quiet flow. Looking back, it became clear that the proposal was more than stone and pipe. It was a small reflection of human imperfection and hope. The shared conduit, once a distant dream, now lay beneath the castle, silent and unassuming, an invisible testament to the slow, often humorous ways people strive for understanding. As generations passed, the memory of debate and doubt faded into a gentle nod towards progress. The castle still stood with its familiar walls, touched now by the faint humor of human stubbornness, and the quiet courage to try anew. In the end, simple acts, like evolving bathroom practices, reminded them that even long-standing customs could subtly bend, carried forward by those willing to listen at least a little more patiently. Somewhere unseen by most, a blurred face of a prophet might have smiled at the slow, human dance of change and tradition. On a quiet evening in the castle, the inhabitants prepared for another night, unaware that a sudden storm was gathering beyond the stone walls. As thunder rumbled softly in the distance, the old wooden latrines stood carelessly in the shadows, their aging wood absorbing the distant drumming of rain. The men, using their designated spaces, remained largely unaware of the slow encroachment beneath their feet, their routines unaltered by the brewing tempest. Meanwhile, the women's chambers, slightly elevated and nestled within a different wing, remained damp, but comparatively untouched, an irony that, in this quiet fortress, slowly grew between the divided chambers. The storm's approach was gentle, but determined, a natural reminder of how life's built-in distinctions might someday meet their quiet, inevitable test. As the rain fell more persistently, darker clouds pressed overhead, and odd sounds echoed through the castle, gurgling waters and splashes that grew louder and more urgent. Inside the men's latrine, the ancient plumbing could no longer contain the rising torrent, flooding the space with a slow, inevitable flow that spilled onto the stone floors, turning modest routines into urgent chaos. A few soldiers, distracted by the storm's distant rumble, paused in confusion, their faces flickering with worry as the filth seeped outward. The women, meanwhile, heard nothing more than the soft patter of rain, their chambers remaining dry, quietly marinating in their separate fates, unaware of their neighbors' unfolding predicament. This division of space, once merely practical, now carried a quiet but sharp reminder of their disconnected worlds. The irony of the situation hung heavy in the air. While the men's wing was submerged and contaminated, the women's area stayed relatively untouched. A stark visual reminder of how societal design shaped even the most mundane crises. Some of the castle's residents, observing the flood's slow unraveling, chuckled softly at the absurdity of it all. How a simple storm could expose the fragility of their carefully divided quarters. Servants hurried to scoop water with rough cloths, their movements subdued and tired, as if resigned to the quiet comedy of human imperfection. The blurred faces of prophets or wise figures, long gone, seemed to linger in the shadows, unseen but subtly amused by the quiet irony. The flood was more than a mess. It was a mirror reflecting the absurdity of human effort to keep worlds separate, even at the mercy of nature's unpredictable precision. As the storm waned and the skies cleared, a gentle calm returned to the castle, the waters receding with a slow, measured grace. The inhabitants moved with subdued patience, cleaning, reflecting, and quietly acknowledging the limits of their meticulous divisions. The air, once thick with the scent of wet stone and muddy water, cleared into a gentle silence, broken only by the soft sounds of sweeping and shifting. The fact that the women's chambers emerged relatively unscathed, while the men's spaces faced contamination, prompted a quiet, contemplative acknowledgement of human vulnerability and the absurdity inherent in their separate routines. Perhaps, in this stillness, everyone sensed that the true division was less in their latrines and more in their expectations of control. As fragile as the flimsy walls of their tradition-bound world, in the slow, lingering aftermath, the castle's residents sat quietly, perhaps pondering the strange, silent lessons of that stormy night. They understood, without grand speeches or moral judgments, that even their most carefully designed spaces could not fully contain the unpredictable nature of life. The flood, now a distant memory, left behind a quiet humility, the realization that all human efforts to separate and control are, in the end, delicate and often humorous in their fragile earnestness. As they resumed their routines, the blurred faces of prophets and elders seemed to fade further into the shadows, their unseen yet constant presence reminding everyone that simplicity and chaos are but two sides of the same old stone coin. And so, the castle settled back into its gentle rhythm, quietly acknowledging that human worlds, like storms, are best met with patience, humor, and a touch of resignation. In the quiet hours of the castle's early days of sanitation reform, Lady Myrle and Aldrich stood at the threshold of change, their eyes fixed on the simple wooden latrines. The air carried a faint scent of damp stone and old wood as the workers laid out the plans, uncertain yet hopeful. It was a time when the needs of men and women had long been divided by tradition, each side accepting their separate routines with weary familiarity. As dawn seeped through narrow windows, the sense of a new beginning hovered softly, fragile yet persistent in its quiet optimism. The castle's inhabitants, largely unaware of how history would quietly shift, went about their routines with small, unnoticeable acts embracing slow progress. Tension emerged as the community confronted the existing disparities: women's spaces blocked by heavy curtains, men's more accessible, but shared with strangers. Voices rose softly in discussions, debates muffled by old walls and the monotony of daily chores. Lady Myrle's gentle insistence on fairness seemed a distant whisper amid the sound of scraping stone and measured footsteps. It was ironic, perhaps, that in trying to create privacy, the castle had built walls that faces and feelings could not easily pass through, fostering a subtle sense of division. Yet beneath it all, there lingered a flicker of purpose. Human routines, after all, preferred the familiar even when they needed to change. In the midst of the slow upheaval, an unseen humor persisted. The workers, often men and women from different parts of the castle's domain, joked about the old routines and the new designs, pointing out that even in hygiene, human folly persisted. Shadows of unseen prophets or figures of authority loomed softly in the background, their faces blurred, perhaps amused by the small absurdities of progress. The plans for dual access, separate yet unified, began to take shape, each corridor echoing with the faint sounds of tools and quiet laughter. It was a quiet irony that the most modern feature of this initiative mimicked the age-old human desire for order and privacy, an almost humorous contradiction in the grand march of history. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted towards calm as the new dual-access latrines neared completion. Their walls sturdy, their doors quietly closing behind each user. The people, tired yet patient, adapted to the subtle rhythms of change, standing in the cool morning air, waiting for the first official use. Lady Myrle and Aldrich moved through the corridors with a sense of gentle accomplishment, exchanging soft nods and faint smiles. The very act of opening these shared spaces seemed to foster a sense of communal safety and individual dignity. born from patience and quiet effort. The light outside grew softer, illuminating the simple, functional design that now symbolized shared human needs amid the old stones. As the first sunrise gently cast its warm glow over the castle's newly opened, equitable latrine corridors, a collective sense of harmony settled softly over the inhabitants. The day's slow dawn reflected a quiet victory. No grand speeches or loud victories, just a shared understanding of human imperfection and the slow process of aligning needs with kindness. Lady Myrle and Aldrich observed from a modest balcony, their faces blurred by the gentle light, contemplative yet quietly satisfied. In the stillness that followed, it was clear that lasting change was often measured in these small, enduring acts of patience and compromise. And so, the castle's story settled into another quiet chapter, full of the unremarkable grace of everyday life, moving forward with humble dignity.